welcome to the channel. In today's video I'm gonna talk about loops, particularly for and do while loop. In a previous video I did some exercises on while loop and I introduced the use of while loop in programming structures. In today's video I'm gonna focus on the other loops that we did not cover yet. The first one of these is the for loop. The for loop is a general loop structure and it is the most frequently used loop in programming. The idea of for loop, the way that it runs, is almost exactly the same as while loop, and the statements, as you can see, are executed one after another, just like how they are in the while loop. However, there is a big difference in how you write these expressions. Basically, in a while loop, you write these expressions in different lines. First, you define an initial condition of the loop, which is on the beginning line of the loop or when you introduce the variable. In the second expression, a logical or a conditional statement is defined where this is actually controlling the iteration. And in the last one, as long as the loop structure is true, you basically show how the expression 2 is gonna execute. You can increase or decrease this statement or change something in it so that an infinite loop would not be created. In a while loop structure, these are written down on different lines. In the for loop, however, they are placed on the same lines. So just to show an example, if you want to write a for loop, you can define a structure where you introduce a variable, you can define a condition, and that variable or another one can be changed based on the loop structure. The difference between while and for is that you initialize the statement in while outside the loop, you define the condition, and some updates are done within the loop itself. Where these lines, these statements, these expressions are all done in one line. This is the main reason why people prefer for loop instead of the while loop, because they can see these conditions, these statements, in initialization, condition, and updates all together in one line. So in a complex structure, it is much easier to control this in the program. Just to show you an example, I'm going to write a for loop question, a for loop example, and solve it with you. So assume that we have a question of writing a program. Write a program with for loop where the user will be asked to enter a number and that many numbers will be asked to the user to be entered. The program calculates the sum of all these numbers and show the result as the output. So to solve a question like this, you can use a for or a while loop. Previously we solved a question like that one in the while loop. Now I'm going to show you how you can solve a similar question, this one particularly, using the for loop. So first thing first, we're going to define the include statements, the standard statements in our program. So IOStream, using namespace std, integer main, and underneath I'm gonna put return 0. You can put C in ignore and C in get, as an optional statement. Once these are placed, you can ask the user to enter a number, and get this number. Once this is done, you will need to create a loop structure so that you can count the numbers from 1 until to this number. Now if I was going to use a while loop, I have to initialize a variable in here, I have to define the condition in here, and in some place inside the loop I have to keep updating it so that it won't be an infinite loop. Now because I'm not going to use a while loop, I'm going to use a for loop, so all of these statements can be written down in one line. Even the initialization, even the definition of the variable can be written in here. So I can do integer I, which is basically listing us the number that we're going to start. I'm going to start with 1, going up to the number itself and increasing it one by one. So instead of writing all of these on different lines, I just wrote them in one line. The way that how this executes is, it starts from 1, and as long as it is less than this number, whatever number is being entered there, it will execute something, and at the end when it reaches to here, this statement would run just before the bracket, and it will go up, check the same condition again from the last value of I. And as long as this is true, it will continue. Once this statement is no longer satisfied, which means it's going to be false, then it will stop and no longer execute. So just to show you, we created a number. So I'm going to ask the user to enter these numbers one by one. So enter number, whatever that number is. So we can put a number sign should you want to, and just show that specific number. In this case, that number for me is I, and then expect the user to enter it. We can get this using cin. Now you can get that number as anything, it doesn't matter. We already defined the number, so I'm going to define another one as n. So I'm going to come in here, define the numbers as n, and I'm going to define a sum as well. Since I'm supposed to calculate their sum, the program calculates the sum of all these numbers, so I defined it as sum equals to 0. So as the user enters these numbers, I'm going to put sum plus equals to n. Don't mix up the number with n, because number is the number of how many times the user wants to enter. In fact, we can change it how many numbers. It will be better actually if we change it to something like this, so that we will know the upper limit. So each time now, as the numbers are being entered, they are added to the sum, but it's not finished yet. So we're gonna go down and show the sum when this quits. So whenever this loop executes, it starts from 1, goes to how many, assuming that how many is 5. It will go down, it will ignore this statement now, it will go down, expect the user to enter a number, the user will enter a number, and this will be added to sum, and it will go up again. But before it goes up, at that point, it will increase I++. So in fact, this is the very last line of the loop. That's how it executes. Now when it goes to the next stage, next statement, it will check this condition, and as long as that condition is true, it will continue to execute this. Now when this is finished, we can simply show the sum. Sum is equals to sum. So I'm going to compile and run this. We can save it as for loop, and we can basically change this variable, how many number, and the program run. As you can see, I'm going to type 5, so each time I'm expected to enter a number. So I'm going to enter 10, 25, 15, 30, and 10 again. So 25, 5 more, 30, 40, 70, 80 and 90. So the sum is, as you can see, 90. You can try different numbers just to check it easily. So if I enter 3 numbers, I enter 2, 8 and 10, the answer should be 20. So this is how the program runs. So you can basically do exactly the same thing using a while loop. You don't have to use for loop. Now it's best if you know both loops because they are used for different circumstances. I will say you will find for loop most oftenly used, especially when statements like this, when they are control statements. And you will find while loop when you actually do not have an idea when the execution will stop. So for example, if you are counting the characters in a file until the end of file, a while loop is the preferred way to do it. But if you are counting numbers in between 1 and 100, a for loop is more frequently used. So if you know the numbers that you, or the whatever items that you are counting, if you have roughly an idea, you usually prefer to use for loop. And if you do not have an idea, but it is still a control loop, then you would use a while loop. They can be used interchangeably, however. So every question, almost every question that you can solve with for loop, you can also solve it with while loop. So we can come in here just to show you the solution of the same question. We can define I value as 1. We can do the while, and this exact statement I'm going to write is in there. And inside in here, what I'm going to type is sum plus equals to the number n, just as in there. And also we have to type this manually. Now instead of for loop, I use while loop to solve the question. So if I execute this, and if I enter 3, 8, 2, 10, you will see that the answer is exactly the same. So basically, if you can solve a question with for loop, you can also solve it with while loop. We actually never tell you which one to use, but as I said, most frequently you will find for loop to be used in control structures. Now there is also another loop called do while loop. Now do while loop is a little bit different than for loop and while loop. The difference lies in how it executes, because essentially a do while loop is a loop that executes first and then controls the structure. Both while and for loops, they check the statements, they check the condition first and then only executes if that specific condition is true. So these kind of loops are called control loops. The do while loop, however, is the reverse of how control loops are. It is the reverse of while loop. And what it does is it executes a condition and then checks it. So even if the condition is false, it will execute at least once. This has specific advantages in certain conditions. This is why the do while is not as frequently used as the other loops, but it is still useful in certain circumstances, particularly when you need to run something at least once, even if the condition is wrong, such as you can create a do you want to continue window, or you can create a menu and display it every time the user makes a selection, even if that selection means leaving the program. So just to show you how do while loop works, you can define an integer value as 5, and you can create a do while loop and say cout hello world. Now as you can see, I created a do. So the do part comes first. And whenever you want to define the condition, you can write a while either at the end of the bracket, or most frequently you see it next to it. And you can define a condition. You can say that x, as long as x is equals to 0, we want to execute this situation. Now when we look at a program like this, if we have written this program in while loop, it should never execute, because we are checking the condition for this specific loop only when x is equals to 0. However, initially x is 5. So if this was a do while loop, this condition should have never worked in the first place. But because it is a do while loop, it will work at least once. This means that execute the condition first and then check up this statement. So whenever I run this, even though the condition itself is completely false, you will see that it runs and displays you hello world. This is the power of the while, and it comes with certain advantages, especially when you want to create a screen that you want to continue or do more operations. Assume that you are being asked to enter a number, and then each time you enter this number, you add it to a sum, just like the way that we did in the previous question. So now that you enter this sum and you add it on the top of it, you want to ask the user if they want to continue or not. Press any key to continue, press Q to quit. And we can take that up as a choice and store the while. So the choice itself now is a character. Now how do I define this condition? So I can say that if the choice is not Q, which is the lowercase q, or we can put an and if the choice is not equals to capital Q, so as long as this choice is not Q, continue to execute the program. That is what I'm trying to create here. So if I press any other key than Q, it will still continue to execute, ask me a number, and when I press on Q, it will stop. So this screen, even if the user wants to quit instantly, it will be displayed at least once. So I'm going to run this program. So it says enter a number. Let me just put the columns here. Enter a number. I'm going to enter 5, and it should also display me the sum. Let's just display the sum each time. Sum is equals to sum itself. So when I run this program, I'm going to enter 5, and sum is, as you can see, is 5. Now I'm going to press any other key than Q, let's say P, and it asks me the number again. I'm going to enter 10, and this time the sum will be 15. So if I enter Q now, it will stop, as you can see, and quit the program. So this is the power of the while loop. So what it does is, even if you want to quit instantly, it can still display you this part where it will just quit the program. So this will also work for capital or lowercase q. So instead, if your caps lock is on, it will still work. So I'm going to put 4, and I'm going to put 5 and 5 again, which will show 9. Now I'm going to enter capital Q before I entered lowercase. Now I'm going to enter capital Q, and it will quit the program. So you can create a press any key to continue screen or a menu just by using the do while, because even if the user wants to quit instantly from that menu, it will still work. Now with this video I covered the for loop and the do while loop. In the next one we're going to talk about nested loops. So take care.